we'll call this Q&A with Keith. And this week we're going to address a multitude of questions, up to 5 potentially if we can. However, we have a bit of a combo question on this first one for you, Keith. And these all come from comments section within Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. So if you want to be heard, let us know a comment, and perhaps you'll be on the next Q&A with Keith. So number 1, let's get into it and address the shock cage and the design process. Both Schwangster on YouTube and ADHD_MTB want to know more about the shock cage and how it helps isolate loads and helps the suspension. The nerdier, the better is the call to action from those guys. So
I can get pretty nerdy. Yeah, so one of the challenges with making any metal frame is to work around welds, because welds pretty much always, you can be clever with it, but pretty much always tend to be the weakest point in a frame. Not necessarily the weld itself, but the material next to the weld because of heat affected zone. And heat treatment can cancel that to a large extent, but there's still a point where around a weld there tends to be a weak zone. So the idea with the shock cage is to remove welds from the equation where there's high load. So let me just share this with you and I'll talk you through a little bit of it. Slick process. Let's see if we get there. Okay, Brian, can you see my screen?
Yep, we got you.
So here we got shock cage. This is for the Titan. Every one of our KS2 bikes has got a different shock cage in terms of material thickness, height of certain areas or dimensions of certain areas, locations of pivots. So they are all unique. Some people think that we use the same front triangle and rear triangles, and we just change the lengths or we change the geometry of the rear triangle. But actually, all of our frames are unique to that model, which is possibly to our detriment. It makes it a lot more expensive to produce, but the idea is that I don't want to compromise in any one of them. There are brands out there, and it would be easy for us to do the same, where we just use the same across all models, and it'd be cheaper, but there'd be compromise. So anyway, that's a quick thing. So this is a Titan one. So the idea here is the highest loads on any full suspension bike tend to be around the shock and pivot locations. And on the front triangle, in most designs, you've got a shock mount, which is, you can see here, the little steel insert there. And you've got the pivot locations. So in this case, it's what we kind of call the main pivot, or yeah, you can call it whatever you want really, and then the upper rocker pivot here. So if you take away welds between these locations, you're going to decrease the strength of the area. If I had welds cutting across here, then I would end up in a position where that weld would be getting a lot of strain, because when the shock is compressed down through here, the equal and opposite, Newtonian load forces and things, Newtonian laws, as the shock compresses there, it's going to be basically trying to extend and pull this pivot away from the main pivot and away from the bottom bracket, because the bottom bracket is going to be getting pushed down. This pivot actually is getting pulled backwards, sorry, and this pivot is getting pulled up pretty damn hard. I mean, we're talking like a ton of load. It's significant loading, bottom out for average size rider. So yeah, if I were to have welds across the way, that weld would be taking it. You can try and be clever with weld shapes and angles and stuff to minimize potential of it. But ultimately, a weld's going to take the load. So if I take one of these and just open it, our shock cage is made of 2 parts. The computer runs a bit slow with CAD when I'm also doing video stuff, but here it is. So this is what one of these parts looks like, and they're welded, 2 halves are welded together. So while there are welds, the welds are not going across the loading. And that constant weld in the middle is also held together by every pivot location, by the shock mount, by the bottom bracket, obviously the weld itself. And there's a tube that goes through here, which is welded in as well. So not only is there weld down the middle, which is quite strong, but every weld is supported, and it's kind of just, it's not even a factor when it comes to the loading of the shock and the loads on the part. So the whole point of this is to remove welds that are going to be loaded by the shock, and isolate them all within this one section. If I share, but it's not going to let me do this in one move, I don't think. Or maybe it is. If I switch across to this, then you can see, I mean, this is just our website, it shows it, but as the shock's uncompressed or very little compression, there's a little bit of load going down that way. It makes this little force thing. And then when it's full bottom out, the loads are significant, but they all cancel each other out. The whole thing is a self-canceling equation, effectively, so that the loads from the shock and pivots do not transfer outside of the shock gauge in isolation. Obviously, you've got fork loading, you've got side loading, you've got maybe somebody's on their saddle, so that's loading. There's all sorts of other loads going on, but at least you're taking out the equation, or you're containing the loads of the shock, which are the most significant loads. And so when it comes to the best way to do that design-wise, if I switch back to the other one to show you, need to find a slicker way of doing this. Then, yeah, having it all as one piece is good. And this, the shape of it is really, it's used a lot of FEA to find the optimal design for these cutaways. So it's minimized weight while maximizing the strength. And these are all designed to accommodate and cope with the load in each location, and spread it out equally, and also maintain the structural stiffness and strength as we want. You don't want any one location on a bike frame to be too stiff. If it's too stiff in one location, then you can get sort of slightly unusual stresses and strains in other areas, and a weird feeling of the bike sometimes. I've ridden some bikes which feel like, in some ways, they're very stiff. Some bikes I've ridden, well, one I can think of, I won't say any names, but the rear triangle felt really stiff, and I was getting loads of sort of trail feedback when I'm getting hit sideways by rocks and roots. But the front triangle torsionally was very flexy, so it felt like I didn't have direct steering. It was sort of twisting on me. And so, yeah, it's important to have a good stiffness profile throughout the bike. So part of this is strength, part of it is stiffness. Obviously, it's trying to do it for reduced amount of weight, and then adding in things like cable ports, zip tie locations, the spline for the ICG mount. All these things are just trying to get as many parts or many functions of as many functions as possible from a single part. So that's the kind of idea behind the shock cage. And I'm rambling on a bit. I don't know, is there anything you want to ask about it, Brian?
I was just about to interject if you're winding down on that incredible bike nerdage right there that I think everyone's going to really appreciate. I didn't want to simplify things too much. However, I thought it would be kind of cool to just take one step back and learn a little bit about your inspiration for this design. Compared to your previous design, this is obviously much different, and there's a huge purpose behind it. So I'm sure there was an inspiration for the process behind doing this forged. You called it the canoe as well. There's some other kind of fun things behind this, but and a lot of people also, just to address, have a misconception that this is CNC'd, in which case it is not.
Yeah, so it's, well, this, yeah, just to tackle the last part there, it is post machined, but this is a forged, each of these are forged halves. Again, if I switch back to our website, I think we might have a picture of it somewhere here. I have to do this twice every time, which is a bit slow, but right, okay. So yeah, here you can see it. So these are forged parts. The reason why these are forged rather than machined is there's actually less material loss. It's more efficient. It's more environmentally friendly in the long run. But also, when you forge alloy, you align the grain structure really well, and you end up with actually a part which is roughly 10 to 12% stronger than a CNC part. You also get greater control of consistency. And then we post machine these in CNC machines using special jigs, and each one is machined differently for each frame model. Pivot locations are put in differently and bits machined off, etc. So yeah, you end up with a stronger part. It's all about strength to weight, really. And we don't cheap out when it comes to making our bikes. We could do things a lot cheaper than we do, but we make a premium product, and so we try not to, like, the cost factor is not the highest priority for us. If we were a big conglomerate or owned by a big conglomerate company like many brands are these days, we would have an accountant coming in and completely forcing redesigns of our frames because they're too expensive to make. But thankfully, we don't have that, so we can play around and do cool things that other brands would not be able to afford to do, or not want to afford to do. They could definitely afford to do it. They just want to make more margin than we do. So that's basically what it comes down to, that. And the other question you had was, how did I get to this? Well, actually, the first design with this was my master's thesis before I started at Banshee, which was designing the Legend. And the Legend actually originally was designed in 2 halves, just like this. But at the time, we could not find a forger willing to forge the scale of those 2 halves within the bike industry. There's automotive guys, but you had to do like 20,000 or something at a time for them to be involved, and that was not going to happen. They don't do batches of 50. So yeah, the Legend ended up getting split into multiple sections, and it had to get made more beefy to accommodate the fact that there were a few welds within the cage. So I think it ended up being in 5 sections, the Legend. So there's 2 side struts, a back central piece which went the whole way across and spanned it. That was the main structural part, and then the 2 canoes at the bottom. So yeah, I guess the KS2 bikes kind of came from the Legend because, well, it worked well. And then the opportunity was there that forgers were prepared to do things like this for us, and it was a slightly smaller part, and we managed to tick a bunch of boxes. And because the same forging is shared by 5 models, it made it viable for us. Although the forging's the same, the machining's different. The previous V2, Rune and Prime and whatnot, they did not use this. I wish I had. We had there's 2 problems with welds when it comes to full suspension bikes, really. One is the loading, as I said earlier on, they're a weak point. The other one is that welds pull material. So when a weld cools, it tends to contract the area. So one thing we saw in our older bikes was we had the shock mount welded onto the down tube. And as the weld cooled, it actually slightly bent the down tube. Not visibly, but if you measured it, we've seen it move by as much as 4 millimeters. And so we did have to invest heavily in jigs to try and control that, but it was always a battle to maintain accurate position of shock mount. And if you added that to the fact that there's similar sort of thing going for pivot mounts and locations, and they were all welded relative to each other, and you added in sort of the combined factor of all of them moving a millimeter, could have huge impacts on the leverage curve shape and DB height and all sorts of things. So it was controlling it was a constant battle, and we obviously had jigs when it came to welding them up, but by the time they'd gone through heat treatment and were being checked in alignment, they'd moved. So we had to develop various processes to try and lock them the whole way through. But it was a battle, and we had issues with it that meant we had a quite high failure rate that we didn't want to ship. So yeah, again, combining it all into one part simplified things significantly because the weld and that part is sort of a self-contained stiff part. The welds can't deform it, or very minimally. And the welds aren't really close to the pivot locations or anything. So, and then we also post machine. So after it's been welded, we post machine the bearing bores, the axle bore for the top pivot. We do all these things afterwards to really ensure that alignment is perfect. Yeah, it's quite a process, and it's been a learning process over the years. I think everything I do when it comes to bike designs, I take what's worked well, and I maybe use parts of that, and then anything that I've had an issue with or anything that's not exceptionally great, I'm always trying to sort of improve upon. Even stuff that is good, I'm always trying to improve upon it, and take the best of what we've done and move forward with everything else. So it's an evolution, really.
I've got a bit of a follow-up that I know people are going to be curious about. You mentioned that the original Legend was supposed to be forged two halves and then put together. Is that something that could be accomplished now? And is that something that you would potentially pursue still, or is
I don't want
have
to talk about
things
Brian.
changed?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. That
here,
is.
but I figured everyone else is on my page too.
It's on the to be confirmed, shall we say? Yeah, there's some stuff in the works. Well, we've always got stuff in the works for
Oh, yeah.
future designs. COVID's and backlog of stock and things like that have made it hard for a small company like us to move things quickly. But by not moving quickly, we can do things properly.
Well, just touching on the industry, which we will in a bit, it is possible in the mountain bike industry to do this sort of project now compared to looking back nearly 20 years ago when that initial design was being implemented.
Yeah, it's unusual though. I don't think I know of anybody else doing it quite like we do. I think there's more companies willing to do this, maybe because they need the work. I think there's probably more efficiencies in how the tools are made, things like that. We're willing to pay for it, which we maybe couldn't have done back in the old days because budget was so tight then. Yeah, I think just technology's improved as well. There's different methods and processes and machines for forging, for hydroforming, for X, Y, and Z. Which mean you can control it. Because I mean, one of the problems we have, in a sense, we've created for ourselves is we insist on using 7005 alloy, which is not as easy to form and weld and stuff as 6061. So, I mean, we use it because it's better, but it does come with challenges. And over time, technology is improving from the manufacturing side so that we can actually beat those. But yeah, it's always we always have to push our suppliers somewhat to deliver. We're quite an exceptional case for a lot of these things with these suppliers, and actually some of the forging companies we work with, we're the only bike company that they've ever worked with because not many, even big brands, often will just machine stuff rather than forge. I mean, I'm sure they forge certain sections which are very commonly used, and they can do it huge scale, but they're not as complex as what we do. Yeah.
And then that, I guess, moves us on to here. Let's go back to your talking head screen here to ensure that people can see your beautiful face while
Oh yeah, sorry.
Navigating some of your thoughts and takes on the current industry, which Keaton Bell from YouTube commented that he wants to learn more about from your perspective.
Sorry, repeat that. I was too busy trying to get my ugly face back on screen. Thoughts in the industry. Thoughts in the industry.
Keaton Bell from YouTube wants to know what some additional thoughts and if you have any tangents on the mountain bike industry.
I could go off in many.
I know which one to choose, really. Yeah, it's a bit of a broad topic. I'm not sure if there's any current events to kind of go off of, but things that you haven't necessarily already broadcasted.
Yeah, okay, so thoughts in the industry.
Yeah, maybe we just start broadly, just kind of the current
broadly
state.
the state of the industry. So the bike industry is not in a great state. Should come as no surprise to anybody that reads anything about this sort of stuff. The COVID knock-on effects, there were certain significant brands that did not read the situation well, and they reduced production when they should have been increasing it, because I think they thought that everyone's going to get locked inside, nobody's going to buy bikes. Then they realized that they were going to all buy bikes, and they did huge production scale, which took over the whole manufacturing sort of coping, well, like the level of manufacturing that different countries could cope with, which forced us and many other brands out. So we had a point where we had to order stock for the next 3 years, expecting delivery. Our normal production timeline is 3 to 6 months, depending on what we're doing. Suddenly we were ordering in advance for stuff, because if we didn't order, we weren't going to get it. And then it took 2 years to be delivered. So yeah, that is not an unusual story in the bike industry. There are many brands like ourselves who faced that. And then, of course, add into that the knock-on effect that when we finally got that product, like many other brands, the COVID was over. People were getting back to work. A lot of people were selling secondhand bikes, and big brands were dumping stock in the market for crazy prices. And so it's been an interesting journey over the last few years, which we have, thankfully, we forecast it to an extent. I don't think we quite forecast how quickly the market would drop off and how hard it would drop off, but we did think it would drop off quite significantly. I think we'd be in a really good place right now if we'd managed to get everything we wanted in the time scale that we were promised when we ordered it. But I mean, there was just so many things at work there that we can't really blame any one in particular. Some factories were making for big brands rather than for us, and we were sort of sidelined, and pushed to the back of the queue. But you can't blame the factories when it's an order for 10,000 frames versus an order for 100. So it's tricky. I should say we only work with one factory. In terms of the actual factory, they were as good as they could be. It was the suppliers of tubing, suppliers of forgings, etc., that was difficult for us. Anyway, yeah, the industry as a whole is still rumbling on with this. There's still a backlog of stock with many brands. The prices have been pushed down. I mean, we're doing sale pricing right now, and the reason we're doing that, and they are significant sale prices, is because we want to rebalance our stock levels, and we want to have cash to invest in future products, testing, prototyping, designing tools, getting forgings opened, etc., etc. All those things cost a lot of money, and so we are right now effectively giving you killer deals so that we can invest in future product. That's really what it is. And yeah, there's brands out there who have unfortunately collapsed. And there's brands out there who are being financially supported through it because they're part of a big conglomerate or got wealthy shareholders. We are neither of those. We are 4 guys, well, 4.5, and we
You calling
we
me
don't
fat?
yeah, we don't have any shareholders. We don't have. I mean, we're our own shareholders. That's all it is. So thankfully, we don't have to pay dividends. We don't have to do that. And the problem here, I mean, I'm getting a bit businessy here, but if you are a huge big company that's turning over $1 billion a year and you've got shareholders, you've got to keep the shareholder happy. How do you do that? By saying there's going to be growth year on year. And so even when it was obvious that demand was dropping away, these brands were producing more bikes, and compounding the problem. And then it got to a crunch point where I'm aware one of the big brands dropped an order, like just cancelled an order for a huge number of bikes. I mean, we're talking millions. That basically shut down some suppliers, as far as I'm aware. I'm not quite sure the impact on all of them, but it basically caused big problems. Some of these companies had expanded their business to cope with the orders, and suddenly the order was pulled. And that had knock-on effects as well from a supply chain point of view. So yeah, from the supply chain point of view, it's been horrible. It's been difficult. It's been challenging. It's been interesting. You know, we have to take it as an interesting challenge. That how do we deal with it? But it has been challenging. And then from a customer buying perspective, there's so many deals to be had. You know, from brands that are, you know, have gone bust, they're liquidating stock, to the big brands that can afford to sell their frames cheap because they're cheap to make. And then the second-hand market is, you know, a good place as well. For, you know, it's getting flooded with stuff. So yeah, I mean, thankfully, we only sell frames, and our customers are knowledgeable, like real enthusiast mountain bikers. They're not kind of people who just wander into bike shops saying, I want a bike, and they walk out with whatever they're sort of told's best. Our customers know what they're buying. They're educated in it. They've done their research, and a lot of them are also repeat Banshee customers. So they know what they're buying. You know, they know quality of products and sort of ethos of the brand. So we're lucky in that regard. And also, you know, we get people who will upgrade their frame. They will, you know, they might not be able to afford a whole new bike right now. Let's face it, the world's an expensive place. A lot of people are struggling financially. The dentists and whatnot will be buying their brand Y bikes, and, you know, not blinking about it. But most mountain bikers, you know, bikes are expensive, and it's a very cautious investment from guys right now and girls, because you know, money is so tight for so many people. So what we are seeing, thankfully, is a lot of people will upgrade their frame, of a frame which maybe has been damaged and they've not been looked after by warranty. In fact, a lot of frame sales we're getting right now are from people who are riding for brands that no longer exist and they don't have warranty support. And, you know, we try and help our dealers help them. But also, yeah, people are upgrading a frame because it's cheaper to upgrade a frame and keep the parts than, you know, try and sell a bike in a difficult secondhand market and buy a whole new one. Plus, there's a lot of parts out there which are really cheap. So people are doing custom builds, and they can put together an absolute killer custom build, and they might not use the latest T-type transmission stuff or whatever, but they can put together like for less than, you know, the lowest end T-type transmission, you could be putting together an XO1 drivetrain build, and, you know, there's great deals of forks and all sorts of components. You actually end up getting a really good deal right now if you shop around for components and want to build a custom bike. So yeah, it's an interesting market right now, and we have our niche in it. We know our place. We're not a big brand. We're not one of these big, you know, companies that do huge amounts of marketing and try and compel people to buy certain things, you know. And we've never been a brand that's gone, oh, you must have longer reach or you must have shorter chainstays. We've always, you know, my design thoughts are always about trying to design the bike that's best, like based on physics, not just marketing gimmicks. And unfortunately, there are a lot of brands out there that do just push gimmicks, like longer is better, shorter is better, lighter is better, you know, all these things. Whereas actually, it always comes around in itself. And, you know, you see people who are 6'4" riding top 10 EWS in a size medium frame. You know, it doesn't make sense. So we've always tried to sort of hold our line, and, you know, there are gradual trends that move around based on type of riding and stuff that's going on at the time. But yeah, we always try and sort of just pick what actually works and stick with it. So our bikes also hold their value better secondhand. We don't change models year on year. We hold models for quite a long time. Only upgrade when there's an actual need to, and stuff like that. So yeah, our place in the market, we know it, and it's a difficult market, but we are fairly comfortable right now. You know, we're We're surviving. We're doing okay.
And one of those models, to move on to the next question, is the Paradox V3. And
Enigma.
yeah, let me Nomads BTT on Instagram wants to know the story behind the creation of the Paradox.
So the Paradox is on its third iteration now. So originally it was pretty standard hardtail for kind of all mountain riding. That's our sort of go-to hardtail. Then the second one had a sort of slight curvature to the chainstays, with the idea being that it would remove chatter a bit. Maybe did a tiny bit, but then the third iteration, which is actually the first Nomad I designed, so the Nomad, oh god, I'm getting confused. First Paradox I designed, because I was very ill for one of them, and the first one's before my time. But the V3, I was like, well, let's take this sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, chatter removal. It's a bit more than vibration removals, but it's not quite suspension. I really wanted to make it so actually you're getting basically the ride characteristics of a sort of steel or tie frame from an aluminium frame. So compared to steel, it's similar ride but much lighter. Compared to titanium, it's similar ride but much cheaper. That's the idea. And compared to both of them, you end up with actually a stiffer frame torsionally and laterally. So more efficient as well, but with the vertical compliance. I mean, compliance is a thing that's often talked about, and for good reason. If you can create a more comfortable ride, it's going to be less tiring. You can have more traction as well. So yeah, the idea was basically to create an alloy frame that had that characteristics, as most alloy hardtails are pretty harsh, and that's not really what you want from an all-day pedal bike, which is a paradox, really. And then the Enigma was like this little brother, which is kind of more aimed at sort of the fun sort of riding, smaller riders as well, I guess, who don't get on well with 29-inch wheels, but also, you can use it for a bit of dirt jumping and bump track and, jack of all trades. It's a great little bike to have as a one bike if you're unable to afford a full suspension. And if you got full suspension, it's not quite as harsh as having a hard hardtail. And yeah, the way that the forgings are designed is very much that they work. You got special sort of shapes in the chainstay yoke, seat stay yoke, and the dropouts. The combination of those is it allows flex under load. So as I say, it's not really suspension because it's not controlled, it's not damped per se. Although actually the tire damping works pretty well with it. But it's a bit more than just vibration damping. It does move, and theoretically, we've never really measured it in the real world. Done a bit of machine testing to do it, but theoretically, you can get close to 10 millimeters of travel from the frame, just from these locations. And they are quite active. So it's not just the fact that we're sort of bending the frame. They do remove the harshness from a ride, which just makes it that little bit more fun, I think. So yeah, Paradox Enigma, if you've not tried one yet, have a shot, see what you think. Compare it to your steel or tie hardtail, and I think it'll hold its own. Oh, and because it's laterally stiff, when you put the power down, it's a little bit like why people want a carbon wheel. It gives you that snap out the corners when you put the power down. It's stiff, and you accelerate when you put the power down rather than losing it to flex. You get the same thing with these frames compared to a steel or tie frame. So they actually pedal more efficiently. I would probably argue, there's so many bikes out there, I can't say that as a whole thing, but as a general rule, yeah, they'll pedal more efficiently than a steel or tie frame.
And kind of back to the industry thing, we've seen a lot more hardtail sales recently. So that might mean people are, looking into a bike that is more affordable and still provides a certain ride characteristic that creates, a new sense of adventure and feeling out on the trail. So
yeah, hardtails are fun.
Yeah.
Let's face it, hardtails are fun. And if you've not ridden a hardtail for a while, you should get one because they'll make you a better rider. And I guess getting slightly older myself, and I've worn my knees out a bit over the years of riding and crashing and injuries and stuff. I remember riding hardtails when I was a kid, and they were like, I was like holding onto a bucking horse sometimes. With the Paradox Enigma, it takes that edge off, and actually you have a bit more control. It's a bit easier to ride. It's a bit less jarring, but you still have that hardtail vibe where you've got to be precise. You've got to hit things. You've got to be smooth. It's really good for your bike handling skills to ride a hardtail and spend some time on it, and sort of hone it back in again.
Always. To move on to the last question.
Okay.
All right. So, Kevin Owens or underscore Kevin Owens underscore on Instagram. He's an awesome Banshee Bikes ambassador, actually. Would like to see here. He would love to see some information or hear some information on the Banshee welding process, as Banshee welds are always so clean.
Well, I mean, basically, the main factor here is we've got really good welders, and we produce our frames in a factory that does small scale production. We've got two welders. Two welders do all of our frames. The factory's got more than two welders, but we handpicked these two welders because they do the best job, and they take their time with things, and they're just very good welders. I can't say anything about my design or anything about anything else about the equipment they use or anything as to it. They are skilled welders. So that's the first thing. In terms of what we do in terms of like trying to make it easier for them to create good welds, it's things like chamfering edges before they weld, warming up parts before they're welded if there's a heat sink area. So for example, if you got a forging which is slightly thicker and being welded to a tube, say, and the tube's quite thin, if they're both just at room temperature, then the heat will not dissipate evenly into both of them. So you'd preheat the heavier duty part, because it will heat up slower than the tube will when you weld it. So you want to kind of create sort of even temperature across both parts. And then it's a case of having, chamfered edges, a little channel that you can weld into, predetermined weld paths. Where you start and stop is obviously very important because we have an overlap and what we call a weld bubble. There are frames out there that look like they're welded really well because, well, they actually disguise the weld. They either grind it away or fill it in with sort of putty before they paint it to try and make it a smooth weld. That's easier to do with 6000 series alloy. It's much harder with 7005. Not even sure it's possible. Well, you can fill it in to make it look good, but yeah, I don't think you can do a smooth weld itself. You can do sort of smooth welds with 6000. Are they better? No. And a weld, yeah, a superficially good-looking weld does not necessarily mean it's a good weld always. The only way you can really find out if it's a good weld is by, well, cutting opens one way, or you can use sort of a kind of a sonar type thing to inspect welds, which we do on a periodic basis just to make sure. And certainly when we're doing prototyping and testing, we do a lot of that just to make sure that, how much do we have to heat this part before welding? How do these weld together? Does this weld path make sense? Is there burn through in this location? Because if it gets too hot, the weld will burn through to the other side. And it might still be strong, but the problem it can create is it ends up being too stiff a section because there's too much material, and the bit next to the weld has to deal with that. So the stiffness profile can be a bit weird. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with welds. I am a pretty awful welder. I'm not going to try and claim that I can do too much. I know a fair bit of the theory, but in reality, what I do is I do my best to design stuff that the welders suggest to me. So when I go to Taiwan and I talk to the welders, who are Filipino, by the way, and speak great English. They can tell me what they like to weld, what they don't like to weld, or, oh, this is fine, or this is a bit difficult to get to. And that's another thing you have to think about, what's the size of nozzles and things like that, and how to get into locations, and how to turn it in your hand when you're doing it. So, we listen to them and get their feedback and try and adopt it as much as we possibly can into future designs and improving designs and prototyping. And then, there's testing and seeing if we've got any problems. Obviously, everything we prototype gets put through test jigs, and we do all the fatigue testing. We always make sure that one frame goes through all fatigue tests rather than what most brands do, where they take one frame for each test. We think it's important that one frame can survive all of them. And then we always turn the tests up way past what they're meant to, and hope it, we only have to pass the required testing, but in-house we always insist on having double the load of required testing and make sure we pass that. And then we turn it up and hope it survives a bit more, and we'd kind of find out where the failure is actually going to happen. The only problem being the machine tests rarely properly replicate what happens in the real world. So this is where we've got prototype testing in the real world under good riders and hacks. Because hacks break bikes more than good riders. And, we actually test things out in that regard, and that's where often you will find more realistic failure modes, if they're going to, or anything like that. So welding's an art form. It's as much engineering as it is art. There's a skill to it. There's the knowledge, getting the temperature right, getting the preheating right, obviously the actual welding process and staying in the right place for the right length of time, and all these things. And then also, something that does come into play, which we've seen in the past, and we've now got on top of it, is years ago, I remember dealing with the difference we got in welds that were done during winter and done during summer, because the ambient temperature being different. And also, humidity of the air and things like that. So there's a lot of control put in place by the factory to manage that and control that. Not just from quality of weld, but also comfort of the welder. They don't want to be sitting in 40 degrees welding all day. That's not, these guys are pretty tough, but they're not going to be able to do a good job if they're doing that. So they've got to be comfortable. So there's lots of factors with the welds, and obviously it's something we take very seriously because all our bikes are welded. But there's two guys responsible for every frame we make, and they know what they're doing.
And to reward everyone who's made it this far, maybe kind of throw them a bit of a Scooby snack. Do you have any additional Easter eggs, or potentially maybe insight on a guess of kind of future of the industry or something of that nature?
I guess, what can I give away here? There's, as I say, there's always stuff we're working on. I think a lot of people are going to be hoping I'm going to say V4s are just around the corner. They're not. There are, I've got some ideas, but they're far from anything we're going to see production-wise. So that's not happening. But, maybe hinted that there might be a dark side coming. There's some parts floating around that are in testing. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't just change things for the sake of changing things. We've got to make sure that when we release something new, it is better in every way than what we had before. So we take our time about it and we do it properly. We don't just churn out new frames every year. But yes, we have got some stuff coming. There will be at least one new model next year, probably two, I would guess. Depends a bit in testing. We're not going to rush it through. If we have problems with testing, we're going to stick at it and we're going to refine and improve and evolve until we are satisfied. So we have to put some good time on them first. But we're always looking to the future, and I'm pretty excited about what's coming, and I think people will like it.
Well, that's it. That's all, I think, for Q&A with Keith this time. If you
Cool.
guys have comments or questions for Keith, write them.
We should have like a
Comment
coupon
section.
code for anybody that's made it this far. Can we
Yeah,
give
let's do
people like a
that.
discount of some soft goods? Let's create a discount code. Survivor 10.
There you
Let's
go.
do that. Survivor 10. If you put that into our soft goods store, you'll get 10% off your next order.
That's a good
No, no
scoop.
capitals.
Want to hear your question read and addressed, definitely let us know. And maybe just kind of write a note alongside Q&A for Keith, or hashtag Q&A for Keith. As all these media, video and audio things are, a lot of it's experimental on our end, and we try to give back and provide a little behind the scenes and feed the beast, as well as the Banshee fans, as we know that you will consume anything and everything that we do put out there. So we do thank you for your support greatly. You're why we do it. And until next time, I think that's
Thanks,
it.
guys.
That's all.
Appreciate it. And yeah, get your questions in if you've got any things you really want to know about, and I'll try my best. And so will Brian, so will Michael, so will Jay. We can all throw in our bit.
Yeah, maybe Keith can do a Q&A towards me. That would be fun.
Oh, yeah, I'll test you.
Put me in the hot seat next time. We'll see. But
yeah.
until then, peace out.
Great. Cheers, guys. Adios.